A land as rugged as it is magnificent. Dominated by monumental forces of nature. Towering above it all is Mount McKinley. Nowhere else on the entire continent of North America has the Earth pushed itself so high and so dramatically into the sky. In the next hour, we'll discover a backcountry mecca for all who seek solitude. A vast open tundra where wildlife roam free. We'll rappel up the icy edge of a glacial crevasse and take to the air over a river of ice. We'll raft down a raging rapids and cruise a riverbed to uncover a frontier glorious and wild. And we'll let you in on the many secrets of Alaska's Denali National Park. Stretching across 6 million acres in the central part of the nation's largest state, Alaska, Denali National Park remains a wilderness, remote and mostly unexplored, where snows and avalanches, deep cold and darkness rule this subarctic region 7 to 8 months of the year. Thaws in spring and summer bring up to 24 hours of light to this land of the midnight sun, and some of the warmest weather in all Alaska. The Alaska Range, a majestic 650-mile-long chain of mountains, divides the park into 2 distinct climates. On the north side, much of the lower area of the park is covered by a spruce forest mixed with aspen, poplar, and birch called taiga, a Russian word for the woodlands of the far north. At higher elevations, the treeless alpine tundra takes over, hosting a variety of dwarf shrubs and plants that have adapted to a short growing season. The tundra provides a habitat for the park's abundant wildlife. In contrast, the south side of the Alaska Range is wet with rain and year-round snow, as hundreds of glaciers or rivers of ice moving slowly under the force of gravity carve out the valleys and gorges.
One of the unique advantages of working in Alaskan parks is they're large enough where you can see both sides of an ecosystem process, where you see the before and after, where a glacier is and where it has been and where it's forming. So you can actually study what a process looks like as it's happening. And it's a perfect natural laboratory for that.
Rising above it all is Mount McKinley, the highest peak on the North American continent. The first humans to set foot in what is now Denali National Park were the Athabaskan people who called the mountain Denali, meaning the High One. Soaring to an elevation of 20,320 feet at the summit, it lives up to its name. You'd think the view of one of the largest single objects on Earth would be hard to miss. And on a clear day, the mountain is visible for over 150 miles. But finding a clear day is not so simple. The mountain creates its own weather system, with storms that shroud it in clouds 2/3 of the time. But when Mount McKinley does appear, the view is astounding. Chugging along the tracks between Fairbanks and Anchorage to Denali, the blue and yellow cars of the Denali Express are a welcome sight year-round. Visitors hop aboard for a ride through the Alaskan country that makes getting there half the fun. 2 dome-roofed cars offer panoramic views, and nobody's in a rush. The Denali Star slows down about 25% of the time to let visitors take in the scenery. On board, you'll meet some well-versed local high school students who act as tour guides in the summer months, a time when the park receives the majority of its visitors. Carving a railroad across a remote territory with extreme weather was a daunting task. After private investors failed, the U.S. government took over the job that required importing absolutely everything. 8 years and $60 million later, in 1923, President William Harding drove a golden spike into the track at the town of Nenana, 50 miles north of the park, and officially opened the railroad. It truly was a railroad through the wilderness. In the first year of operation, only 62 passengers traveled by train. Today, thousands of people make the same trip, following the flat terrain leading to the point where the Alaska Range majestically comes into view. The destination? The Denali Park Station, inside the park, where travelers either meet tour buses or make their own way to the main visitors center to hook up with the park's shuttle bus system. Their ticket to experiencing the great outdoors. Near the visitors center, a piece of park history is preserved at headquarters, where the original 1920s and 30s log buildings are still in use. Among them, you'll find one of the most popular places, the Kennels. In a land with an emphasis on winter, these Alaskan Huskies are a star attraction year-round, complete with individual doghouses that sport their own names. They're actually bred for temperament, and that's a good thing, since the Denali Park Kennel draws nearly 50,000 visitors each summer. This park has been home to sled dogs since 1922, when Harry Karstens, the first park superintendent, brought in the dogs as a means of patrolling for game poachers. Today, between October and April, sled dogs are the only transportation permitted over 1/3 of the parklands, apart from snowshoeing or skiing. Karen Fortier leads Denali's dog sled program.
Now, some of you still may wonder, isn't there a greater means of transportation today? What are some reasons you think we might still want to use them today? Yeah, noise. 2 million acres of the park is designated as wilderness land. So within those wilderness areas, we don't use mechanized vehicles. And it's sort of to keep that natural silence in the world today. That's kind of a shrinking resource.
Breeding and training the dogs is all done at the park. A musher is likened to a coach who puts together a team to complement canine strengths and weaknesses.
It's all voice commands, so when you say G, they're going to go to the right. When you say ha, they're going to go to the left. When you say whoa, you're hoping that they stop, but that's the hardest command to teach any sled dog. I think they like what they do. There is nothing in the world that they love more than to run and pull a sled, and you can kind of see that as how excited they get. And they even do this 3 times a day, and if you can multiply that level of excitement by about 100, that's what they look like in the wintertime.
The dogs of Denali are distinct. A larger freight style of dog with a heavier coat makes them more like a breed found in these parts earlier in the 20th century. Their long legs are suited for running through untracked snows, and they have an excellent memory for routes that lead to shelter from year to year. While these natural-born runners vie for any opportunity to sprint, they're also perfect hosts. When the spring snows melt and the crowds come in, they take time off to mingle and enjoy the dog days of summer. Each year, an estimated 300,000 people venture to Denali National Park in search of one of the last frontiers. Yet, they're only able to cover a tiny fraction of a place where a lone road through the middle of a vast landscape is one of a few hints of civilization. The park banned vehicles in the 1970s in order to protect the wildlife. And with the exception of the first 15 miles, today, it's Denali by bus. The gateway to the park is the Denali Visitor Center. Here you see firsthand the park's role in regulating travel, from campsites to backcountry permits, mapping and mandatory training. Venturing out into this wilderness requires pre-planning. Once on the bus, drivers become your guides.
Good morning. Hopefully you have food and water with you. There's no place to get water out in the park. On the side of the building here, left of the phones, there's a spigot. You can fill a water bottle at this time if you need to do that.
The bus makes frequent stops along the road to pick up or drop off backpackers heading out where the only trails are animal trails. At Savage River, the dueling architects of water and ice are apparent. Here, a glacier-carved U-shaped valley meets a water-carved V-shaped valley. Along the Savage River Trail, one of a few in the park, a hard-working group of volunteers are mastering the art of trail building on what is called a social trail. Because it's close to the road, so many visitors climb Savage Rock that the park has opted to build a single trail to minimize the impact. A crew of 5 to 8 people take an average of 16 to 29 hours to build 10 feet of trail by hand. It's slow going, but for those who volunteer, it's more than a job.
There's a spiritual component in it for me. There's something euphoric and something meditative about hearing the chinking on the rocks, hearing the mule gulls making their sounds, and just the wind. The weather is always really, really beautiful since we've been up here. Yeah, there's something spiritual about it.
The Savage River check-in station is symbolic. From here, traffic is limited to park buses. Other vehicles can only proceed by special pass. For those who venture on, the character of the road changes from paved to gravel as the land becomes wilder. But it's not just about wildlife. Denali's rugged backcountry calls to the more adventurous. People step off the road and they're almost immediately immersed in a pristine and at times inhospitable country, much like the first explorers who ventured here.
We're gonna head on down this way.
For those who find trailless travel too intimidating, a discovery hike led by a ranger is the way to go. Although this tundra may look barren, shrubs growing knee to waist high give the bush country its name. And there's much more to it.
If you guys want to see what caribou tracks look like, here's some good ones right over here. And we can tell that it has a hoof because of these two different parts of the track.
As the land becomes more winding and wild, several natural phenomena might catch your eye. The valleys of mud, gravel, and silt are a result of glacial carving. Melting ice, snow, and rain form braided rivers, or rivers that meander from bank to bank in several channels. Their patterns change during the course of a day with the weather. Anyone traveling on them needs to be aware the levels can also change dramatically. Approaching the Polychrome Pass, once nicknamed Poison Point, because one drop will kill you, the twists and turns lead to a view that's a multicolored sight to behold. And it offers another glimpse into Denali's geologic past, a past that stretches back millions of years. The array of hues are a result of volcanic eruptions that once dominated the region. Volcanoes are just one of Earth's forces that shape this spectacular place. Frequent earthquakes speak to a land still in the making. According to Phil Breeze, the chief geologist at Denali National Park, Alaska is one of the most active earthquake areas in the world, and Denali is located in the northern end of the seismic action. An ongoing series of earthquakes are monitored.
They're often quite deep too, because the earthquakes are usually happening where the plate is subducting beneath Alaska.
Where climbers up on Mount McKinley have reported feeling the shake of a quake, most quakes go unnoticed because they occur at depths of 100 kilometers beneath the Earth. A seismograph in the Eielson Visitor Center can be the only visible sign of trauma. Located at the 66-mile marker, Eielson is a main check-in point along the park road. And it bustles with activity.
We call these dew claws.
Dew claws. And do they serve any purpose?
From ranger demonstrations
Okay, raise your right hand.
to the swearing in of junior rangers.
As a junior ranger,
As a junior ranger,
I promise.
It also offers an opportunity to get a closer look at Mount McKinley. Like the quakes, the answer to the question of what makes this mountain so massive can be found beneath the earth.
Here in Alaska, we're sort of a receiving end of a big conveyor belt that we think of as the Pacific Plate or Pacific Ocean Plate. And that plate is migrating northward at rates of 4 to 6 centimeters per year and slamming into Alaska and crunching it against the Arctic basin, kind of like a big accordion. So it's getting pushed up by that crunch.
While the mountain is uplifting at a rate of 2 millimeters per year, on the surface, massive and powerful erosion devices in the form of glaciers and rivers constantly carve the rock away. The secret to McKinley's height is its resistance to weathering.
It's made of very hard granite rock, and it's surrounded or intruded into sedimentary rock that's very soft all around it. So the sedimentary rock actually weathers away faster, exposing more of the granite.
The road winds its way to the Talkeetna district, where you'll find another piece of park history. 91 miles from what is now the park entrance, there was gold in them thar hills. In 1905, 2 prospectors struck gold at Glacier Creek, and the gold stampede was on. Tales of big strikes lured hordes of prospectors to the area. Mining camps sprung up overnight.
But only about 50 miners had the claims along Glacier and Eureka Creeks, which were where the paying quantities of gold were found. And so pretty soon it dissipated, but in the meantime, towns grew up, and here on this site was the town of Eureka, and later changed to Talkeetna.
The gold rush played a pivotal role in the establishment of the park. One of the early founders, Charles Sheldon, was concerned about the killing of game to feed the mining camps. So in 1917, Mount McKinley National Park was set aside, not to protect the gold or the miners, but as a game preserve. In 1980, an additional 4 million acres was added. And mindful of its Native American past, the name was changed to Denali National Park and Preserve. Today, Talkeetna is part of the park where you'll find remnants of the gold rush. The 2-story original roadhouse, built in 1905, once provided food, lodging, and supplies to the 2,000 miners who camped nearby. And the old recorder's cabin was the place where miners came to register their claims. Joe Quigley, one of the first and most successful miners, met his wife Fanny in Talkeetna. When the Quigleys divorced, Fanny stayed on. Her cabin, where she hosted both prospectors and park visitors for over 30 years, has been restored by the park. Inside, time is turned back. A wood-burning stove for heat and simple furnishings are reminders of a hard life in the wilderness, as well as a tribute to Fanny Quigley, who was said to garden with a vengeance, hunt like a man, and entertain like a queen. Her pioneering spirit made her a local legend. All mining operations in the park were halted in 1985, with one exception.
You're going to pick up a scoop of water, and you're going to mix it up, and be prepared because the water's cold. And you're going to mix it up, and then you're going to dump it off.
Visitors are permitted to pan for gold. So if you want to try your luck, pick up a pan and head for the chilly waters of Eureka Creek to get a lesson in panning for gold from an Alaskan gold miner's granddaughter.
Now, gold is denser than anything else in this pan, so it's going to sink to the bottom. So don't be afraid about it being on the top because it's going to sink. So you just keep doing this over and over and over again, and every time you dump off water, you got to dump off a little bit of dirt until you get down to this fine stuff.
Just like the prospectors of yesteryear, the boom is a bust, and most leave empty-handed, except for a few shiny souvenirs. The Talkeetna Roadhouse provides cabins and a welcoming lodge where visitors come for lunch or longer stays. All set in a spot that brims with gold rush history and something more. Owned and operated by the first human inhabitants of the park, the Athabascans, this is the place to learn about local native culture.
Here
Here in the interior, the Athabascan Indians have for centuries roamed this land, and actually Kennels is an Athabascan Indian word, which means heart. The Athabascan people were nomadic. They followed the caribou, they followed the fish. They didn't settle in communities, they just followed the food, basically. And so this is where they came to do the moose hunting.
Just up the road from the Talkeetna Roadhouse, Camp Denali is a remote wilderness hostelry. Founders Celia Hunter and Ginny and Morton Wood offered their guests a tent and one of the first ever ecotourism experiences back in the 50s. Today, extended stays of 3 to 4 days are required to give guests time to delve deeper into the backcountry. One of the original tents is left intact, so guests can see what it was like to stay out here in the 50s. This is no ordinary tent. More like a cabin, it came with a Coleman stove, furnishings, provisions, and bunk beds. Camp Denali has grown to 17 log cabins. Accommodations at this getaway are cozy and still relatively basic. And it's the only place to stay indoors in the park that offers a view of Mount McKinley, although that depends on the mountain. On any given day, the weather from one end of the park to another is a constant variable. In the summer months, it rains more than half of the time. Yet Alaskans never let it get in their way.
If you're prepared for it, you'll love the changes because the park changes, the light changes. There's always something wonderful to see no matter what the weather is. You want to come with clothes that are layered, that you're able to take on and off because you might see some rain, sunshine, wind, even a tad of snow perhaps, but it only adds to the experience. It doesn't take away from it.
The Denali Backcountry Lodge offers equipment and instruction for a variety of activities, rain or shine. And there are plenty of places to kick back and enjoy the moment. The mountains and shimmering lakes of Denali National Park in Alaska provide the backdrop for one of the premier places on the planet to spot wildlife. High above the timberline, the Dall sheep, the only species of wild white sheep in the world, add a pastoral grace to a rough country. From their strategic view, these elusive cliff dwellers use their eyes to detect most signs of danger. Their strong legs are made for speed in steep country. When they do come down from the mountainsides to migrate, they do so with extreme caution. That's when they're most vulnerable to predators. Around the park, caribou are another common sight. While they may look peculiar, truth be told, they spend much of their time on the move, feeding and fleeing the parasitic flies that plague them. Caribou often take to the road with a swinging trot, traveling alone, in small groups, or in bands of 200 to 2,000 in winter. The Denali caribou are unique because their entire migratory range of some 3,900 miles is included within the boundaries of the park. Unlike moose or other members of the deer family, it's more difficult to tell who's who by the headgear, since both sexes sport their own rack of antlers. As with any wildlife, keeping a respectful distance is key. At this rest stop, it's very clear who has the right of way. Denali is also bear country. Black bears that inhabit the deep forested areas are rarely seen in the heart of the park. Unlike a grizzly, they can climb trees with ease, and they tend to stay clear of the open range. The park road cuts through a grizzly habitat, so the farther you venture out, the more likely you are to spot a grizzly bear. While spotting a bear from a safe distance is awesome, when exploring this country on foot, no creature sparks as much fear. Bears can be dangerous to humans. Back in the 80s, Denali National Park had a high rate of bear encounters per backcountry user. Now, it's a model for successful bear management. Although the rangers say it's more accurate to call it human management. A program that begins with mandatory education before anyone hits the backcountry. Since hikers are required to carry bear-resistant food containers, and trash containers have been retrofitted with bear-resistant lids, most bears have gotten the message. There's no payoff for encounters with humans. And humans are monitored as well.
What we have here is a bull caribou that was killed right about here, about a half a mile off the road. There's a sow and a cub on it right now.
And it's right down on the gravel bar?
It is on the gravel bar.
If we have a kill somewhere where we know there will be a lot of people, if there's a travel corridor to a backcountry unit or an area where we know there's going to be a lot of day hikers, we'll close an area to keep people out of there. And we do that for a number of reasons. One is for safety of the humans, because if someone happens to get too close to a bear that's on a kill, it poses a dangerous situation for those people, as well as to keep disturbance to the animals to a minimum.
Rangers try to minimize outside impact so bears can focus strictly on their own survival. Survival that has been the subject of study by the park since 1991. Monitoring the bears has led to some Denali bear facts. There are an estimated 350 grizzlies that roam some 80 to 270 square miles of parkland. While a bear can live into its 20s, one female has reached the ripe old age of 35. The amount of births varies from season to season. Sadly, 70% of all cubs die before the end of their first year. The study revealed lifespan in this subarctic region has a lot to do with the physical condition of the mother bear. These 3 young cubs set off down the hill while their mom was working her way through a berry patch. But they weren't out of sight or out of mind. Once scent determines there's no danger, everyone is called back to the berries. Beyond bears, wildlife at Denali includes 167 species of birds. Some migrate to the park from as far away as South America. Smaller critters give the area much of its wild character and round out the food chain. Out of its elaborate system of underground dens, this marmot flattens out on a rock. Camouflage from predators, it catches some rays. The marmot's whistle warnings alert an array of species, including the Arctic ground squirrel that stands at attention, with good reason. Their small bite size makes them a source of meat to many of the park's predators, including this fox, who's out looking for a meal. In the many ponds and creeks, there's plenty of evidence of beavers and their cooperative projects. One of their dams at Wonder Lake actually raised the lake level a record 2 feet in the 60s. Although they're mostly nocturnal, in the late afternoon they can be out and about. These large rodents weigh up to 60 pounds. Their back feet make excellent paddles. This beaver is busy multitasking. Using its front feet as hands to feed on a twig, it glides through the water. The secret to spotting a moose is to stay away from the open tundra. Look for tree-lined habitats that provide both food and cover. Near the entrance to the park, a bull moose trims the trees. Moose are herbivores, meaning they eat the branches, twigs, and bark of trees. And they eat a lot of it. Weighing over 1,000 pounds, a large moose can consume up to 50 pounds of willow a day. They're also tolerant of people. They'll stand 75 to 100 feet away and go about their business. Yet for humans, the very sight of a moose can cause a moose jam. Only the males, called bulls, grow antlers that begin popping up in late winter and grow for several months before turning to dense bone by the end of summer. The bulls use their antlers to attract cows or females during mating season and to defend their right to mate.
Antlers are weapons, and bull moose use them to fight with other bull moose. They engage antlers and they push and they twist and they fight by using these weapons. There are sharp points on the antlers, and occasionally bulls inflict a lot of damage on them to the point where occasionally bulls die during rutting fights.
After mating season's over, the bulls shed these potential lethal weapons. Wildlife biologist Vic van Ballenberg is the park's resident expert on moose. He says people have a lot of misconceptions about these mammoth mammals.
I think people think they're big and dumb and slow and ungainly and all those kind of things, and to me, they're none of that. I mean, they are big, but they're fast. They can run 35 miles an hour. They're not dumb. They're intelligent to the point where they make decisions as to, what they're going to do on a daily basis in order to survive.
Denali is considered to be the premier place to study subarctic mammals. One of the foremost researchers of ecology, Adolf Murray, spent his summers living in a one-room cabin on the East Fork River. His observations of the park's wildlife for over 40 years changed the way wildlife biologists view predators, especially the wolf, who he thought was just out making an honest living. Dr. Gordon Haber claims he studies the descendants of the same wolves that Murray began observing in the 30s. Unlike Murray, Dr. Haber takes to the air to follow the wolves of Denali. With a tracking device, he's able to monitor the wolf populations across a much broader area than he could possibly cover on foot. Back on the ground, he's well aware of the location of their remote dens. While he isn't exactly what you'd call a wolf whisperer, he does seem to speak their language. And the wolves howl back in response. According to Dr. Haber, it's a misnomer to say wolves live in packs. They're social creatures who live in large family groups, and wolves are extremely bright.
I guess the best way to visualize it is think of the most intelligent dog you've ever known, the most expressive, intelligent, emotional dog you've ever known. That's nothing but an average wolf. And of course, wolves have to be more intelligent and expressive and all the rest because they have a much harder life than a dog does.
These carnivores hunt in groups, feeding on the weakest sheep, moose, and caribou, and other creatures.
They have to be very selective in order not to be killed when they tangle with these bigger, stronger critters.
Wolves and other predators are now viewed as an important link in the cycle of natural selection. Denali National Park became a national park to preserve wildlife. And it remains one of the best places to stand back and get a glimpse of the animal world. At Denali National Park in Alaska, the gently sloping tundra of the subarctic meets the pinnacle of North America, Mount McKinley. Around the park on any given day during the summer, you'll see professional photographers in search of the most beautiful sights. Following them will inevitably lead you to the shores of Wonder Lake. 85 miles into Denali National Park, it is the closest one can get to the mountain from the park road. And its beauty can speak to the soul. On a glorious August day, one photographer mounted his camera on a kayak to capture the lake and the mountain in the distance. But for him, the real payoff is just being there.
It gives you just a feeling, it's like, I guess like a religion. You come here and it's just very mellow and very nice and just beautiful everywhere you look. And if it's cloudy and the mountain's not out, you've got wildlife all over. It's just a wild place.
Wonder Lake is another aftermath of the Ice Age. A receding glacier carved out this 2.5-mile long, 280-foot deep natural wonder some 14,000 years ago. It's surrounded by all sorts of vibrant wildflowers and bushes filled with berries. Following the road to the east leads to Reflection Pond, where on the rare days when the water is perfectly still and the sky is clear, the pond is a mirror for Mount McKinley. At sunset, the northern light bathes the Alaskan range in a vibrant pinkish effect known as the alpenglow. This picture-perfect moment has become one of the classic images of the American wilderness. While most are content to gaze upon mountains, others are called to conquer them. At the onset of the 20th century, Mount McKinley, the largest peak on the North American continent, began drawing daredevil adventurers from all over the world. And with them came stories of triumph and tragedy. In 1906, explorer Dr. Frederick Cook's second attempt to summit Mount McKinley was a highly publicized event. After wandering around on Ruth Glacier, named after Cook's daughter, Cook and a packer parted ways with their expedition. He returned, claiming to have made it to the top within an unbelievably short 2 weeks, and he offered up a photograph to prove it. For Dr. Cook, a picture was his undoing. Poor cropping left the corner of a peak exposed. An expedition in 1910 found Cook's fake peak, placing him 11 miles away from the summit. Cook's hoax inspired a ragtag group of local miners, nicknamed the Sourdoughs, to attempt an ascent with only crude climbing implements. Where knowledge of the geography and gumption contributed to their phenomenal feat, they mistakenly climbed to the top of the North Peak, 850 feet below the true summit. Finally, in 1913, a climbing expedition that included Harry Karstens, who would become the park's first superintendent, reached the highest peak. It's fitting that the first person among them to set foot on the summit of Denali, the high one, was Walter Harper, a native Alaskan of Athabaskan descent. Approximately 1,200 people attempt the climb each year. As they step off the plane onto the glacier, their bodies immediately undergo changes. Thin air and the elevation make breathing difficult, and no matter what you eat, you'll lose weight. An average climber burns 5,500 calories a day. Climbing this mountain also means traversing glaciers filled with crevasses hundreds of feet deep. It only takes one look into this abyss to know that your next step could be your last. Long poles are used to route find or search for hidden crevasses. If you punch through to feel air, then you know to take a detour. Yet there are limits to what you can see or feel.
You can't tell how strong all the snow bridges are, so we need to have a backup safety system in place. And that's where the harnesses, the ropes, us being spread out on a rope team. The majority of big crevasse falls translates directly to slack in the system, and someone wasn't walking at the exact pace of the person in the front of the rope team. And that's the challenge, is that you can't walk at your own pace. You need to walk at the pace of the person in the front.
I'm going to go down into this hole, into this crevasse, and ascend up the line, and this is how I can self-rescue myself if I were to fall in a hole in a real situation.
Climbers must train for every eventuality on the mountain. Using a device called an ascender and a series of knots that act as pulleys allows a person to shimmy up the icy edge of a crevasse. If all else fails, climbers have to be hauled out by their rope team.
It's always a good feeling to get out on top again.
Yet the biggest challenge on the mountain isn't crossing the glaciers, it's the erratic weather. During climbing season, May through July, snowstorms can create whiteout conditions. Temperatures can drop to 50 degrees below zero with ferocious 80 to 100 mile an hour winds. And the higher you go, the more problems you have.
We have frostbite injuries just because of the extreme cold with a huge mountain like this that's so far north. We have altitude injuries or altitude illnesses.
At 18,000 feet, the air contains only 50% oxygen. Breathing it can cause loss of strength, sleep, appetite, and reasoning. Park rangers say inexperience and bad judgment account for 90% of all climbing accidents.
When you're on the top of Denali, you have about 50% of the mental capacity you do is at sea level. And it's probably true for most people. I know I was asked a simple math problem when I was up there this year, and they say I was a ways off from getting the right answer, but I've never been a mathematician.
When extreme weather conditions trigger climbing accidents, the drama begins. A drama that included one of the world's highest short-haul rescues. In 1998, 2 British climbers were lifted off the mountain by the Park Service's high-altitude helicopter at 19,000 feet. In spite of the heroic efforts, there are fatalities on the mountain, among the many happier endings. In a year with good weather, half the climbers share the euphoria of reaching the top. And there are always new mountaineering milestones. In 2001, Galen Johnston, an 11-year-old from the nearby town of Talkeetna, was the youngest person ever to summit. Galen began climbing at age 2. Mountain climbing with the Johnstons is a family affair. His father, Dave, braved -148-degree weather in the first winter ascent of Denali in 1967. Like all expeditions, training to tackle Mount McKinley began on lower altitude mountains.
It started with going to Nepal to see if I did well at altitude, and that was in '99. And so we just went up in the Everest region and saw that I did fine at 18,000 feet, so I figured that was a pretty good trial and came back, and next year went up.
And success for the Johnstons was dependent upon the weather.
Our summit day, it was so just clear and relatively warm, 10 degrees, but and no wind. It was on Father's Day, so as my dad says, it's the best Father's Day present I've ever given him. It was just really powerful to be up there as a family and look back at our house and be able to now think that I've been up there.
Radiant and daunting, Mount McKinley stands among the world's superlative summits. In the millions of acres of open country surrounding Denali National Park and Preserve, distances are deceptive. What appears to be 10 miles may in fact be 50. And the land unfolds in front of you for as far as the eye can see. Beyond the park's boundaries, adventurers take to the air to cover more ground. Heli-hiking offers an opportunity for a bird's-eye view before setting out on foot. Since a helicopter doesn't need a long landing strip, there are more options for drop-off points to allow deeper discovery of the Alaskan interior. Guides lead day trips, or you can head out on your own. The helicopter will return to take you home. Needless to say, the pickup is one deadline you won't want to miss. Other adventure seekers take to the water. Several outfitters located near the entrance to the park provide gear, instruction, and transportation to the river's edge. Rafting this far north requires both a wetsuit and a lecture on what to do if you fall out of the boat.
If you start drifting away from the boat, I want you to take some real aggressive swim strokes to get back to the boat. You got to get back. If the current's grabbing you and you can't swim back to the boat, then we want to see you get in a defensive swimming position. You're going to be on your back, your feet are going to be going downstream, and we want your feet on the surface of the water. Pretty much looks just like that.
Once you hit the water, with temperatures averaging 36 degrees in the summer, you'll be glad for the gear and the expertise. The ride down the raging Nenana River is an exhilarating one. If you want to get there with even less effort, Denali Sightseeing Safaris offers a thrill ride. These customized monster trucks with 64-inch wheels weigh in at 14,000 pounds. They're not only designed to travel through rugged terrain, they can cruise down the gravel-filled beds of the braided rivers. Riding high and dry in the cab keeps everyone above the fray of the Alaskan bush. And getting to the backcountry outside the park is made easy, especially if the weather isn't the best. On the south side of Denali National Park, surrounded by a chorus of icy peaks, a scenic flight is the way to get a sweeping view of one of the most spectacular sights, Ruth Glacier. Here, the snowfields that blanket McKinley and surrounding mountains year-round give way to colossal rivers of ice that flow 20 to 30 miles through the deepest gorge in North America.
The Ruth Glacier is one of the deepest temperate glaciers measured outside of Greenland and Antarctica. It's over 3,000 feet thick of ice, but from the bottom of the gorge to the top of the neighboring mountain is over twice the size of El Capitan in Yosemite Park. So it is a very interesting glacier and one of the fastest moving glaciers in the park, moving about 3 feet a day.
High up on Ruth Glacier sits one of the park's top secret spots, the Mountain House. On the way up to this house, watch your step. This is a glacier where crevasses are always a potential threat. At this modest one-room shelter hut, you have to bring all your own gear and book a night well in advance. But it offers a view you won't find anywhere else in the world. From this incredible site, a 360-degree panorama of massive 10 to 12,000 foot peaks surround the Ruth Amphitheater. Just how this rustic outpost made it to the glacier is a story in itself. It was built in 1963 as a safe haven by one of the most legendary of all bush pilots, Don Sheldon. The man who earned his reputation as a daring aviator beginning in the 50s. Flying both people and cargo, he was the pioneer of high-altitude glacier landings.
He was my inspiration. He showed me the places to land on the mountain, and I sort of worked into it by following him around with my aircraft. And he would always give me some baggage to carry, you know, for his climbers, whether they were going in or coming out. So I had a wonderful time with Don, and he was just a perfect example to follow.
Bush pilots at the controls of small one-prop planes are the folk heroes of Alaska. They're one of the few ways to get people in and out of the distant parts of the nation's biggest state, and on and off the mountains. Lowell Thomas Jr. first flew over Alaska while producing a film for his father's television series, High Adventure. After serving as Alaska's lieutenant governor, he began flying commercially in the 80s.
And with this airplane, which is standing right behind me here, I was able to make some 12 rescues up at 14,200 feet. But rescues, you know, you're fighting the winds and the visibility, and sometimes you just have to back off and can't do it. But I've done quite a few of them, and we all do. If we're flying climbers, we're sooner or later going to have to rescue some of those guys.
Outside the south side of the park, 60 flying miles from the summit of Mount McKinley, you'll find the quirky, artsy town of Talkeetna. Population, 770. The town is the home base for launching mountaineering and rescue missions, and for any type of flight seeing. In fact, Talkeetna owes much of its history and livelihood to the community of brave bush pilots.
All the pilots here are seasoned veterans. They do what they have to do to help people. If you're in the bush and you're sick and you need somebody to come get you, some pilots can step up to the plate and come and get you.
The Talkeetna Historical Society Museum chronicles over a century of man's attempts to conquer the mountain. A topographical map of Mount McKinley details a rugged and unforgiving country. On the museum grounds, the props of downed planes are a memorial to the lives lost and the courage of the bush pilots who are a part of the spirit of this town. Denali National Park and Preserve offers as many wonders as it does dangers. This place is the product of millions of years of geologic change, and the Earth continues to transform. For many, it's simply a place to contemplate nature and observe natural processes undisturbed by modern man. 200 years since the first European settlements, Denali remains a mostly unexplored wilderness.
It is a link in some ways maybe to the future for some, because we need to have places where in this increasingly urbanized, mechanized, bustling landscape, places where we can find the quiet, the solitude, and the slowness of pace.
It's here animals roam free, and a vast landscape just unfolds seemingly forever, and its size is overwhelming. From Denali by bus to the backcountry on foot, from camping out to taking on the mountain, Denali has secrets around every turn. People who enter this grand space try to capture it, but only for a moment. Ecologist Adolf Murray described the northern exposure experience best. We come to Denali to watch, to catch a glimpse of the primeval. We come close to the tundra flowers, the lichens, and the animal life. Each of us will take some inspiration home. A touch of the tundra will enter our lives and deep inside make us poets and kindred spirits. Our national parks here in the north are set aside not only for Alaskans or for Americans, but for all humanity.